Hello everybody, welcome back to the Looney Bin. My name is Looney, and this video I want to discuss with you about the relationship between Shakky and Rayleigh. As we have seen in the most recent chapters, at least at the time of this recording, about the relationship between Shakky and Rayleigh. We have seen a lot in the God Valley flashback, and before the God Valley incident we saw a lot of different unique things that Oda has kind of written in terms of their relationship. Now, when we first met Shakky and Rayleigh, we knew a very small amount about their relationship, right? To the point where like it's now controversial because of certain dialogue that was said with Shakky and Rayleigh as they are older and live in Djibouti, right? But I want to discuss really more in depth about not only why I think people are taking those lines too literally, but also how their relationship developed and Oda's unique writing style for their relationship, right? And it's very unique because it's not necessarily similar to how I've been making videos about how Oda likes certain dynamics, right? Certain dynamics such as the reckless male character, I should say, and the female character who is constantly worried about them and always grounds them whenever they're going to do something that could really hurt them and, you know, pounds them in a gag form of way, right? But this relationship didn't really have any of that. This relationship had more of a hero saves heroine storyline, right? Very similar to Strong World. And what's really cool about the whole Shakky and Rayleigh incident, or like their relationship in general, is it's basically a love triangle when you really think about it. Oda doesn't necessarily write these type of romance tropes, these romance writing at all, but he has written a love triangle essentially with Shakky, Rayleigh, and Gold Roger being the third member of this love triangle. Now, allow me to explain. Gold Roger had an infatuation with Shakky, like beyond infatuation. He was madly in love with her. However, his way of showing his affection, his infatuation, it wasn't necessarily the greatest, right? He came off too pushy, came off too needy, not needy, but he came off too much to the point where like he treated Shakky like some sort of prize, like some sort of treasure that he really wanted, which most people understand. Most girls do not want to be just seen like that, right? They want to be seen for who they are as an individual, right? Shakky, a very, very strong Kuja warrior. Probably, if you want to go on to have any sort of debate, you could argue that she was probably the strongest out of all the Kuja warriors and Kuja empresses that ever existed on Amazon Lily. Now, of course, my personal opinion is that I think Boruhanka kind of edges her a little bit, but the one thing that Shakky has is that she made a lot of top tiers fawn over her. Now, we don't necessarily see that all the time with Hancock, but it's very possible that it could also happen with her. We just haven't seen her necessarily in a situation with a lot of top tiers. You can argue Marineford, but at the same time, they were in a war, so there wasn't really much time for any of that to happen. However, God Valley showcased that everyone just was like going Google Gaga over Shakky, you know? So it's like, it's mixed signals, it's very debatable, and I don't really want to get into that debate because that's not what this video is about, right? But my point is, Shakky was fawned over by almost everybody, including top tiers like Roger. However, one person that we didn't necessarily see her or see react to her in a certain way was Rayleigh. The first time we meet Shakky, a younger Shakky, was when the Roger pirates and the Kuja pirates clash on open waters, right? And we see Shakky just immediately demolishing the Roger pirates, subduing Gold Roger. You see Roger with the hard eyes and stuff like that. Except for Rayleigh. Rayleigh did not react in any sort of certain way or in that sort of way, right? He was more calm. He was more stoic, I guess you could say. And he had a conversation with Shakky. Shakky was simply just saying, you know, you sure have a tough crew to handle, right, Rayleigh? You know, on the lines of that. And Ray was like, hey, tell me about it, Jesus, you know, whatever. And then she winks at him and he's like little like stun lock, I guess you could best way. But he didn't react the same way like Roger, Gabon, or other characters like Rox or Whitebeard did when meeting with Shakky and stuff like that. And to me, that showcased exactly why Shakky fell in love with Rayleigh, right? there is context missing because we don't necessarily see a lot of the way they interact with each other aside from this one moment, right? Because then after that one moment, we then see Shakky already having feelings for Rayleigh, right? And we don't know. We're missing so much context that, like, that's the only thing I could at least come to a conclusion with, because that's really how it just came off of. Like, Rayleigh did not fawn over her. He didn't treat her like some sort of treasure or some prize to be won, but treated her with some sort of respect and saw her as an individual. And I think Shakky fell in love with that. Funny how that works, right? And later on, we find out that Shakky, after she leaves the Kuja Empress role, right? She sends a love note to Rayleigh saying to come find her, or come or go see her, or on the lines like that. There's some different translations for it. But the point is that this is the moment where we find out that Rayleigh does have an interest in Shakky. But then he says that he just doesn't want to be tied down. However, we do notice something very interesting in the way that after Roger finds out about this letter and finds out about, like, what Shakky's true feelings are, he gets annoyed. He gets annoyed, and when he hears Rayleigh say this, I think that's also part of the problem, where he does get annoyed about. Then we go on to going to Shakky's bar, right, on Pirate Island. And Roger goes there, he talks to Shakky. Shakky asks him about Rayleigh, and Roger says that, Rayleigh said that he wasn't feeling well and just stayed on the ship, right? And Shakky was disappointed. Roger sees this. Roger looks at this. He sees the way Shakky responded and the way Shakky, is reacting to just Rayleigh, right? And to me, when I saw this, I'm like, oh, Roger understood now. He finally understood what Shakky's feelings were. And the fact that Rayleigh did say that he did have an interest in Shakky, I think that came to him in his head the conclusion that both Rayleigh and Shakky do like each other. They're just Rayleigh's just very stubborn about it. And why would that be, right? Why would Rayleigh be sort of stubborn? Well, I think it's because, and I think other people also made this prediction and analysis, is that Rayleigh knew Roger's feelings for Shakky. He did not want to get in the way of that, right? The excuse that he didn't want to be shackled down or just with one person, to me, was just an excuse because he didn't want to make Roger sad, right? He was not going after Shakky or not necessarily admitting his own feelings because he did not want to be in the way of his best friend's, feelings for Shakky, right? And you kind of could see it. That when they find out that Shakky was kidnapped, he did take the newspaper and look very worried, right? He looked extremely worried about her being captured for almost a year. Roger goes out and blames the Rocks pirates, Rocks, because it was his responsibility. She was on their island and such. And over the course, as we get into God Valley, as they arrive, Roger deals with Whitebeard. Now, one can argue that he's doing this simply just so that no one could get in the way, allowing Rayleigh to go and save Shakky before she gets killed or hurt by the Celestial Dragon's Holy Knight, Summers. That's his name. He's such a dumb, pathetic character nowadays. I don't even want to bother to remember his name. He fucking hits Shakky like a little bitch that he was. But right? He held off Whitebeard so that he can allow Rayleigh to go and save her. They have their reunion. Shakky is so happy that Rayleigh's there. Rayleigh apologizes for taking too long about the letter that he received from her. And they basically embrace as she cries in a very emotional moment. It does start to get a little sappy, but, at the end of the day, a really good moment for any sort of, like, couple. Any sort of romantic moment between characters, which then Roger Gaban were annoyed to say, stop being so sappy, you don't have to brag about it, stuff like that. You being like, as we used to say, normies, right? And to me, while there is a lot of context missing, and that's important in sort of any sort of romantic writing, this is still one of the better romantic moments that Oda has written. You know, while we haven't seen like more context with that, and a lot of other ships such as Oda and Toki and stuff like that actually became canon, we're missing context, but it doesn't devalue the moments. The context actually would have improved the moments vastly. And that's why it's important in any sort of romantic writing. The smaller moments, no matter how like small they are, build up to make those impact moments far more special. So if we had more of those little moments, those little small moments, like just seeing like the day-to-day conversations that Shakky and Rayleigh had, you know, there's small moments where they could have like interacted in some sort of way. If we would have seen that, I think it would have made that final impact moment where they hug after, you know, Rayleigh saves her, a lot more impactful and much better writing in that sense, right? Part of my issues with the writing between Shakky and Rayleigh's relationship is that, one, the idea that Shakky was used as basically a prize for the hunt at God Valley, and then using her as essentially just to get Roger, the Rocks Pirates, old there. You know, aside from Rocks, who was there to save his family. To me, that it's like Oda is so close to understanding, like, why like female characters shouldn't always be used in this way. He's like so close, because we do see Shakky literally try her best to escape. Like, she beats the shit out of the guards that were guarding her, but he still has someone show up and like smack her and stuff like that to set up this moment for Rayleigh to save her, right? Very close. Very, 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 very close. He actually perfected it a lot in Strong World, where he had Nami escape Shiki's grasp, right? That's Nami using her intelligence to escape a situation where she is kidnapped, you know, without having the MC save her. And then you eventually have that moment where the MC essentially beats Shiki, right? Nami's already recovered and rescued by Usopp and Chopper in that movie. You know, they see Luffy, you know, glaring up at Shiki in that cool freaking moment. And then, you know, Nami stands up to Shiki at the end. See, that is something that's really well done in that hero saving heroine trope, right? That's what I think it should have been for Shakky and Rayleigh that would have made the writing a little bit better. The context, small moments, and that moment where Shakky's able to escape, you know, just for Rayleigh to, you know, come in and then save her in some other way, I think would have been fantastic. Very good romantic writing. But we didn't get that, so I know people do say that this is probably one of the better romances in One Piece, and I guess you could make that argument simply just because Oda doesn't necessarily do these type of writing. So in terms of Oda standards, sure. Oda has mentioned in an interview with the mangaka of Detective Conan that he's not confident with writing romance. And, you know, it's fair, and I think this is a great testing ground for him. This was a great testing ground for him to at least explore romantic writing and see how the fans feel about it. And most fans do feel great about it. The only ones who have a real issue with it are really the people who didn't like that God Valley was the whole, you know, that she was kidnapped for like the treasure as God Valley. I think that's a fair criticism in terms of that, you know. But overall, this was probably one of better of Oda's writing in terms of romance. Now, moving on to what I mentioned before about the whole thing with Shakky's lines in the future, where Shakky is saying stuff like, oh, I don't know where he is. He's probably shacking up or living in another woman's place while he's away from the bar. To me, and I've said this when people were basically saying this a lot about how like their relationship was in shambles, you know, 40 years later. I don't even know how many years later it was. But to me, that always came off as a joke, a gag. She wasn't even serious about it. She just calmly said it. If it was something that was vastly more serious, which I believe Oda does take a lot of that kind of serious stuff seriously, like the whole thing about like actual abuse, he actually takes it very seriously. Where the gags are like for comedic purposes. There's a reason why he makes it in certain situations, and why and how you can tell it's very much a gag versus an actual serious situation, right? And that came off as not that serious. It really did not. You see that a lot in a really old, like, not even Japanese TV comedies, but also in a lot of Western sitcoms. Married with Children is a great example. where like the wife and the husband, while their relationship is kind of weird in the terms like they make fun of each other, they discuss it by each other, oh, well, they make these jokes about like, if they don't see the husband, they're probably off doing something with another girl while the guy is hanging out with the boys doing some weird stupid shit, doing something outrageous so that when the wife finds out they get mad at them. It's this type of thing. Some people find that funny, some people didn't. Oda came from a time period where people did find that funny, especially in Japan where there were a lot of comedies like that. So, to me, that's what Oda is portraying here. He's not portraying Rayleigh as some sort of guy who goes out and shags with a bunch of women while not being with Shakky at all, right? Or an open marriage, as some people wanted to claim it was. To me, it came off as, oh, Rayleigh's out doing something, right? Someone suggested that Rayleigh could be out gambling or making money to support Shakky's bar because Shakky's bar doesn't really get a lot of visitors, right? Others will point to the line where, Rayleigh says that he likes young women. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's out, being intimate with younger women. When that occurred, Kami was being dragged by a slave auctioneer, right? She was being dragged. And Rayleigh, who was already captive at that point, didn't want to reveal himself, but when he saw what was happening with Kami, he sent out a burst of hockey, essentially revealing himself to his fellow prisoner, who was like, "You're not some ordinary old man. Who are you?" Right? And that's when he says the line. To me, that line came off as, oh, Kami is a young woman and she's getting hurt. I don't like seeing that. And that's why he said it, right? There's no panel at all that showcases Rayleigh ever going out with other women or like doing something with other women. There's no panel that showcases that. I know there was one art that for some reason people are taking it as a thing that actually, is canon when it's a fan art from an Usopp gallery, right? Like, no, you can't really use that. It's a fan art, right? But the point is, it never came off as like Rayleigh is just some gigolo or some guy who's just out shagging with other women. He never came off that way. He always returns to Shakky's bar. Shakky and Rayleigh's relationship is still fine, right? If it wasn't fine, if he was actually doing something, do you think Shakky would actually like be okay with that? I don't think so. She was madly in love with him. That doesn't go away after 40 years, right? It just didn't come off that way. Which is why I don't believe in it. I could be wrong. Oda could reveal or show a panel later that he does do that. And I'll be fine with admitting that I was wrong and that's what Oda did. And I'll be even more upset over it. But I'm choosing to believe that Oda didn't mean it in that sort of way, that it was mostly a gag. So, I think overall, the relationship with the Shakky and Rayleigh was a good starting point for Oda. Was a good starting point for Oda to showcase romance. His romance writing. Even though he does have a tendency to create romantic moments without even trying. Which is the funny part, right? And I think this is all testing grounds for him. The fact that he admitted that he's not confident enough with romance writing and then showcasing a key moment in history, God Valley, as one of the biggest things is this romance between Rayleigh and Shakky, I think is him testing waters for maybe something possibly in the future. Whether it be Luhan, whether it be Lunami, whether it be Sanami, or Sanpu, right? There's a possibility this is, in the wings of Sanji and Pudding when Sanji possibly goes saves Pudding. That's very possible. But whatever route he decides to do, whatever romance he wants to do, I think this was all him testing the waters. And he wanted to use Shakky and Rayleigh as essentially the groundwork and a testing site to get a gauge from the community themselves, right? And for the most part that I've seen, I think most people really enjoyed it. I think most people thought that it was fine. It wasn't, I would say probably it's not the most amazing romance, but in terms of Oda's writing and the very minimal amount of romance that he does do, it's not bad. It's a good starting point. And I think whatever he decides to do later on in the future is going to create a big impact in whatever actual relationship that he wants to really pursue. Whether he does or doesn't, we don't know yet. But again, I think Shakky and Rayleigh was a great testing ground, great way to really showcase Oda's romance writing, and I can't wait to see exactly how he continues to improve on it, which is what I like seeing, right? Regardless of whatever romance he does choose, even if it's something I disagree with, I want to see how he does it. I want to see how he improves his romance writing, because romance writing can be very tricky. It's not as simple as two characters just having crushes on each other. It's not that simple, especially in an adventure story like One Piece. It has to have more context. It has to have more bonding, more emotional growth between characters, because these characters are going through a lot, right? Shakky and Rayleigh went through a lot, right? If we had a little bit more context, a little bit more emotional growth and interactions between them, it would have been an amazing love story. It would have been an amazing romance writing. But this is a perfect starting ground for Oda, and I can't wait to see what he does. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of Shakky and Rayleigh's relationship and how Oda handled it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.